session. We wanted to give some time for interesting and important issues that we don't have time in the busy business hours. So I hope that all of you brought surprise questions for our speakers to engage with them in our panel discussion. We have Mike Alhayek, Burke, Holland, and Toby Dodds today with us, and our moderator, Sébastien Ros. So, thank you.
So I'm the moderator, and we have one microphone. So I will. I have to sit. Ah, crap! Can you close the door?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so Tommy, Burke, and Mike. Sorry, Burke, that's a surprise panel. Maybe you have lots of questions on Orchard, and I know if you know Orchard. So if you have questions,
I'll sit there.
If you have questions about Orchard, if you want us to tell you what Orchard is, fine, you can ask questions. But Burke, I think you are an Azure specialist.
I'm sorry, what?
Azure specialist?
No, I work on the VS Code team.
VS Code now? I thought it was Azure.
VS Code and GitHub Copilot.
Okay, VS Code, GitHub Copilot. Yeah. So if you have questions for him, that will be done. But do you want to introduce yourself? Just we know your background and just what questions we can ask you or not ask you. Mike.
I don't. You will let me speak. You let me just introduce yourself.
You know what I got?
Mike,
Who are you?
I introduced myself earlier.
I want to
Okay, so everyone knows
I know
Mike.
who you are.
He doesn't know.
Oh.
You can go.
Oh, you did? What's the quick one? All right, so my name is Mike Alhayek. I am one of the maintainers of Orchard.
Specialties in Orchard. What are your specialties in Orchard?
A little bit of everything. I don't know.
Security?
Security, sure.
Shapes?
Check. I built the notifications, so I guess that's my specialty. The two-factor authentication, the Azure Search AI. So, if you have any questions about those, I'm your guy.
All right. Hey, everybody. Nice to meet you. I did just get here. I was over at the Dev Intersections conference. It's actually Dev Intersection, no S on it. But I don't know a lot. I'll be honest, I don't know much about Orchard. I do know that it's a CMS. I had heard of it prior, so I am familiar, yes.
Not just a CMS.
No, sorry, not just a CMS. And an application framework. Did I get it? Nailed it. So yeah, so I work at Microsoft on the VS Code team. And so I'm primarily focused on Visual Studio Code itself, but also GitHub Copilot, which is the most adopted AI developer tool in history, and it's also where you get the name Copilot. So you can thank GitHub Copilot that now everywhere you go, you have to talk about Copilots. We're guilty of that. So happy to answer any questions you have on that, or give you non-official answers from Microsoft on AI in general. I just will preface it by saying I do not speak officially on behalf of Microsoft. However, everything that I will say is absolutely true and factual. Okay.
Hello, my name is Toby Dodds. I'm here from Washington, D.C. I've been part of the Orchard community for 10 years, since 2014. I work at Smithsonian Institution, which is your national museum, or our national museum in the United States. And I work in a division called Folkways Recordings. Smithsonian Folkways Recordings is a record company. We distribute a collection of thousands of records, and those records are managed through an application and a database. It's running on Orchard Core. I feel like we have had an incredible success story. It's been a steamy romance between myself and Orchard, and luckily for me, a few skilled members of the community who have taught me. I'm a mid-tier developer who's responsible for the well-being of this website. I say mid-tier and that I'm just able to keep up, and I'm really thankful to be here because I'm seeing I have benefited, my organization, my museum has benefited so greatly from all the contributions from the Orchard community, so I'm here to be gracious and thankful. And if you ask me a technical question, there's probably a 50% chance that I will ask Sébastien or Mike to answer that question. Or Burke, sorry.
Oh gosh. I'll ask Copilot.
You'll get the AI response.
Yeah.
And, that's
So I have a few questions ready that were sent anonymously because apparently some people are too afraid of asking them publicly. And they are super tricky questions, okay? So I will start with one and after we'll see in the audience if there is another one. First question, using the Orchard Core framework, not the CMS. This is written like this, right? Using the Orchard Core framework, not the CMS, the framework itself. I would love to hear more about the benefits to using the Orchard Code framework to build applications instead of just building them in plain .NET Core. So, how is Orchard Core better than .NET to build applications? It's not a Burke question. Maybe Toby, because maybe you could.
when you are part of a small team, when you're part of a small IT team, basically myself, you are trying to stand on the shoulders of as many giants as you can. So, and it's quite a lot to navigate. And of course, this just comes back to the gratitude towards the community. The .NET Core framework and the .NET community is much larger, but much less accessible. The documentation's not there. There's not as much help. And so by leaning in on the Orchard Core component, I just see it as another layer of expertise and solving more problems. And maybe that makes sense.
I have to answer that too?
Yes, please. What's your opinion?
So I actually went down that rabbit hole at once. A few years ago when I was actually getting started with Orchard, I wanted to be able to build on top of the .NET framework. I didn't want the CMS. So I started actually adding those components, and as you can figure, there was a lot of issues that I ran into, part of it because I just wasn't aware of a lot of them. Because I wanted to be able, because my issue was, it was kind of, I had to use ES-SQL. For me, it was a problem because I had a website that had a lot of data, and the data currently is stored many different ways, and I can't really use ES-SQL for it. So that's the whole reason. And then, as that project kind of progresses, I realized there's absolutely no point of doing it. You can still use a CMS, just don't use the content management. I mean, everything else is going to work the same. But the benefit here is that you'll be able to still, if you ever want to go back to content management, you have it. Because feature based, right? So it's a Legos. So you can enable whatever Legos you want, and you're able to accomplish whatever solution you want. But utilizing CMS, you'll have full flexibility on, down the line, what else can you bring in? So for me, even if I didn't want to use ES-SQL, fine. Use a different ORM or use whatever it is that I want in parallel with a CMS. So it's not like I'm designing on the top of the CMS. I'm still writing on the top of the framework with the CMS being an option at my disposal. So that's how I feel. Just use the CMS, and if you need it, great. If you don't need it, oh well, keep it the same.
So the question here was, and you both talked about, I think, the CMS, but the question was really about why use Orchard Code framework instead of just plain ASP.NET or .NET application? Meaning, not even thinking CMS, just what would the framework itself add, or would it have some benefits instead of just burdens? Like, because when you start with a framework, you might be stuck in the framework, right? So why would we use Orchard Core, not thinking about the CMS, instead of just plain .NET application? So if tomorrow you have to start a new .NET application, there is no CMS, and could we just use a framework, or should we not use a framework? And are there here in the audience anyone who has done a .NET app without the CMS? And Chris and Burke.
was actually quite a while ago before Orchard Core, but just the fact that there are modules and themes and multi-tenancy, those are huge and they can be very helpful when you're doing a client project. I worked on a project for a company that was doing products for utilities, and they were able to brand it using the themes and break out the features using modules. So depending on what the customer paid for, certain modules will be available. So things like that, just basic Orchard fundamentals add on top of what normal .NET Core have to provide.
Thank you. Multi-tenancy, modules, features, and theming. Theming.
Shapes.
There was another comment here.
Yeah, and also user management is a very useful thing to have from, I think it's a very good starting point for boilerplate, and I do think that the community should concentrate more on that kind of aspect of Orchard, make it more front and center and accessible, so you can say, okay, here you go, there's a really nice boilerplate where you can get user management, modularization, tenancy, and I don't know, any other useful feature, like some kind of core. So and then say, okay, this is how you start any kind of application.NET with batteries included, and you go off and do everything else. And maybe leave out the shapes at that point.
I'm telling people, don't use shapes. I agree. On the front end, don't use shapes.
Okay. But yeah, actually that's what we're doing. I mean, we also, our default idea is like when we start a project, we start Orchard Core, but with a list of modules, minus content items and everything related to content, and try to do it like that, and then rest.
The issue being that in the GitHub repository it's called Orchard CMS / Orchard Core. So yeah, it's a CMS, and Burke, you said that, like, it's a CMS. Yeah. Like for 99% of the people, it's a CMS, and then, well, it's also a framework, and you can just use a framework if you want. So that was the first question, .NET versus Orchard Core framework. Any question there that I don't have to read? Sorry, time.
Yeah, this one is to Burke. Every time I start Visual Studio Code, it's either necessary to restart an extension, or Visual Studio Code itself is updating, or both. And I get that little thingies in the menu nudging me. Can you make this a little bit better somehow?
All right, well, VS Code updates once a month. So if you see the badge, maybe you're not opening VS Code enough. Maybe you're only opening it once a month. So we update every 30 days, but if we have like a security patch, then we'll update. So if you don't use it a lot, you may find that, like, why is it that every time I go in here, VS Code is updating? Because it updates every 30 days. As far as extensions, I mean, we do auto update extensions for you. You can turn that off in Visual Studio Code, just a setting in the command palette for auto updating extensions. What we did do, though, is we made it so that you don't have to reload the editor every time anymore. So with the latest updates, when you reload extensions, it just reloads. It'll tell you need to reload your extensions. You click that, but it just happens instantly. The editor doesn't reload. So those are two things that we've done to try to make that better, but that's good feedback. If you feel like you're going in and every time you go in, you're being asked to update, you're like, it's terrible, isn't it? Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's not a big deal, it's just a little bit annoying to click around there. And yeah, it's not just the VS Code update, that's rare indeed. Mostly the extensions, it's always extensions updating, and Copilot, by the way.
Yeah, and extensions update more frequently. And for every extension, the extension will offer either like a stable version or a nightly version, like a pre-release. And if you install the pre-release, that's definitely going to update just constantly. It's kind of like a canary version of whatever. So if if you're on the stable extension, stable version of the extension, that'll also update less frequently.
Word.
There was one question, I totally forgot what I was going to ask. There is one question I did have about decoupled orchard, and that is there going to be a push maybe in next year to be using more Blazor for module development?
I don't even know who knows the answer to the question. Antoine? So the only thing I know about Blazor in Orchard, but I'm not supposed to answer questions. Zoltan, you know the answer about Blazor?
Just maybe who to ask. Niraj probably?
Yes, Niraj. So we have a sample. I think we have a PR.
I did see one video of that, of using it, so.
Yeah, and I think we have a PR to push it in the samples repository of Orchard to how to use Blazor. That's what we have. And I think my only complaint on the PR was that there is too much CSS. I wanted to focus more on the Blazor thing than pages of CSS. I don't care about CSS. That's my useless comment. But there is a PR, so when it's merged, then there will be a sample.
I also have a sample on my repositories.
I also have a sample that uses Blazor and references Orchard core and use it as a decoupled using the Orchard helper, and it allows you to manage, for example, a page on the Orchard core and admin, and to display it on a Blazor website, which is interesting.
So it's decoupled because it's Blazor and because there is no Blazor integration in Orchard right now. So it makes it decoupled by design.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also do decoupled on purpose with Blazor pages or whatever. And that's documented already, and that's my way of pushing the things. But yeah, if you use Blazor, you have no choice but to be decoupled because we have nothing internal to that.
Yeah. Or maybe you could use it Orchard as a headless API and consume it and display it in a Blazor WebAssembly maybe.
But then no modularity,
No.
no dependency, nothing from Orchard frameworks. Your app using Orchard core as a headless CMS. So it depends what you want from Orchard. You can push it, you can drive it.
Yeah, but I guess maybe the question was about will there be some kind of use of Blazor in Orchard code itself? And I don't think we are going in this direction.
But it's also community driven. So today, if all the committers don't have interest in Blazor, there will never be any Blazor inside Orchard.
Because there are other .NET CMSs that
Do that, but maybe just do that. Octane, yeah. Which is only Blazor. Yeah.
I noticed in one of the earlier talks there was the Monaco editor in the admin panel. I was wondering if there would be any plans for tighter integration with Orchard and VS Code, so maybe like a language service that would know your content definitions, provide IntelliSense on that, VS Code extension, for example, to allow you to edit shapes. Just an idea. I don't know if anyone's ever talked about that or thought about it before.
I don't think anyone has heard about any implementation of that. Maybe the idea.
If you want to contribute, feel free.
You know, back when I was using Orchard, I almost did do that, write a language service for it. Well, I don't use anyone.
I don't think it's on the radar.
In the SQL queries, is there a compilation for tables?
I think the question here is to have VS Code integration, right? Or just generic Monaco integration?
A bit of both, yeah. So firstly, a language service that would probably run within a tenant. That would give you integration with the Monaco editor.
So
And then
so
also-
Orchard itself full host a language server?
Yeah, because it knows your content definitions, it knows what fields are on there, what types they
Okay,
are.
as a first step, that could be a feature and doesn't have to be in production, but in development at least. And
Yeah, yeah.
Then you could either use Monaco inside Orchard or VS Code with a custom extension to also talk to this one, because it will be the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Once you've got a language service, you can just plug it in wherever you want.
But the language, which language?
Something that will be made up by the community.
And
Basically to define providing IntelliSense for the content definitions.
when you edit what, for instance? When you edit the shape?
It's a
template?
content, a piece of content or a shape.
So templates maybe, yeah. So for instance, when you edit a template, it would be nice to be able to access all the properties of all the types
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
When you run a query, you will say, oh, this query written this kind of type, like GraphQL. When we have the GraphQL schema and we know what properties we get, we could have the same thing on the editor, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe liquid, like editor for liquid.
Liquid
We
would
get IntelliSense somehow.
So that would mean it's more than just liquid language server, it's liquid plus thing, so it's hard. Yeah. Because it's not just the language itself, it's also the data.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's inside the language server, you need to add, so I'm not even sure how to do that, like, or to build the full language server for the liquid or for the, wherever
Yeah.
you want to edit it.
It would have to run in the tenant because it would have to be aware of the content definition within the tenant.
Yeah, but on the other way, if it's for data, and we have GraphQL support, and there is language servers probably for GraphQL results because there is schema. I'm sure there are some extensions to that, like when you do a GraphQL query to get IntelliSense for the data that you are about to get from the query. I'm sure there are some things. Maybe it would be better to integrate with that instead, just as a bridge. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
would like to see the end product documented before, just to see what it would look like in real life, where it would be useful and where we would get the IntelliSense.
Yeah.
It's not clear yet.
GraphQL, your generate.
So when you generate schema for GraphQL, I think I'm using that kind of plugin for GraphQL.
Graphical.
Sorry?
Graphical, the visualizer? No.
Yeah, and I'm talking about VS Code
Okay.
IntelliSense for GraphQL. I think you target it to some kind of endpoint and then pulls the whole GraphQL schema and then it choose on that schema to actually give IntelliSense. Something like that maybe would be halfway to what
It's halfway, but you can already have it with graphical in Orchard itself because you can type the query and probably have the IntelliSense for the query or check the boxes.
Exactly.
So that's it. Yeah,
So,
that's there. But I think the next step is to have it in the editors, the Monaco editors that we have everywhere in the framework.
Yeah.
But every single Monaco editor may be a different issue and different problem to solve with IntelliSense.
Speaking of the IntelliSense and Telecom and GitHub Copilot, my largest annoyance is the whole fighting for completion between GitHub Copilot and IntelliSense. I don't know if anyone else has that kind of issue, but when you press dot, then something's you have that kind of ghost writing, and then you wait for this one, and is there a way? And then sometimes that GitHub Copilot is like when you press dot and it serves you the answer, he's completely wrong.
Right,
Because obviously it's a different system. I understand how that works and why that works like that. But is there a way maybe that in future when you press dot, it just doesn't give you something completely wrong?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and it gets asked a lot. That's called the ghost text. We call that ghost text, right? And so it does interfere with the IntelliSense. And currently the guidance says turn Copilot off, right? So you can disable it for certain file types. I don't know what the file type would be. Is there a certain, is it just like a .cs file or whatever? So you would disable Copilot completions, but then you don't really get the benefit of Copilot completing things for you when you actually need it, because then it's off. So it's a problem. It's a user interface problem and something that we're trying to solve. As far as the incorrect completions from Copilot are, I know exactly what you're talking about, where even though IntelliSense knows, Copilot doesn't know. And you just think, how can that possibly be? How can Copilot be less intelligent than the editor? And you know why that is, right? Because it doesn't know, it can't see all of your code because of token limits, and so it just makes up. It's like, I don't know, that sounds good. Maybe it's this. So one thing that you can do to help with that is to have the related files open as tabs in the editor, because the completions only know about the code that's in the current file, and then it goes and looks at other tabs in the background and tries to pull from those. So that will help quite a bit. Again, it's not a perfect solution, but that will help, and then we're working on the user experience. And I also wanted to point out is there not an Orchard extension for VS Code?
Why would that be?
There's an extension for everything in VS Code. There's an extension to order pizza from VS Code. Did you know that?
People care about pizza, not Orchard.
So I think it's a great idea. Here's what's really interesting. If, aside from the language server stuff, and I assume, I'm sorry, this is coming from my ignorance of Orchard, but I assume that when you're working with Orchard, you have kind of like a local instance that you're working with, that you're building up, and so that local instance has certain configuration that the editor needs to know about so that you can reference it. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
You call it a tenant, like a development tenant?
Yeah. Tenants. I'm trying to describe it now. So an Orchard instance can be partitioned into tenants. So even in your production environment, you might have multi-tenants on your production environment. But the configuration within those tenants, mainly the content definitions I'm talking about, because they're dynamic, they can change.
So it's almost like needing to pass the schema of a database to the editor so that it knows about your columns and metadata.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's something else that you can do, and this is brand new. So again, right, like if somebody wants to build an Orchard extension, if you do that, reach out to me, let me know, and I can get it featured on the marketplace. We can do a live stream, we can promote it. We have a fairly sizable YouTube account. Maybe we'll make you a video, we'll see. But one of the things that you can do that's really new, and I actually think probably most useful in terms of where AI is going, is building what we call custom extensions for GitHub Copilot. So within Visual Studio Code, who has GitHub Copilot? Is anybody here actually? Okay, several folks, okay. So you know how you can do like @workspace and mention your workspace? So you can create one of those yourself. So you could have an @Orchard, okay? And now @Orchard knows about whatever it is that it needs to know about to be most helpful. So you may pass in, and again, I'm going to use the schema analogy, but in the background of the extension, when the user asks a question, you tell the model, you say, here's the question, and by the way, here's the schema definition that the user is working with. And then the model then can respond in a way that's extremely helpful because it knows about your specific configuration. And I actually think, in my own opinion here, that the way extensions implement AI is going to be where we really see the benefit of AI, right? It's never what Microsoft builds. It's always what other people build with the stuff that Microsoft makes, right? So what I'm saying is you need to solve the AI problem for everyone with an Orchard extension, yeah. I think that would be very, very cool. We would love to promote that.
Put it back on the users, come on.
I'm actually curious, is there a push amongst the Orchard community to use VS Code over Visual Studio when you have a solution with submodules and you're dealing with NuGet and the whole IDE requirement? Forgive me if this is a silly question, but
It works.
I use VS Code just for individual files or theming when I want something fast, but I'm still using localhost and IIS Express.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't mean for module development, I mean for theme development. And there's a feature called templates or something where it's like liquid templates. And I've not used Ocean for a while, so I'm a bit rusty, but that's what I mean. Those templates are all stored in a database somewhere. So VS Code could pull them down, you could visualize them in the tree view on the left-hand side, edit them, you would have IntelliSense, and save them back up. I'm talking purely from like the field side of things.
Part of it is I create so many build errors that I really need to see them. I need to build and precompile and see all of them. So I didn't realize VS Code could produce that kind
There
of
is a C# dev kit,
Yeah.
which is new since last year. And you can do whatever Visual Studio does in VS Code with the Solution Explorer, with building, with IntelliSense, with refactoring. And that's what I was about to use this morning, but then my machine worked, so I used my machine.
I'm feeling sad for Visual Studio right now. I still like it, you know.
VS Code might be faster for some operations, like editing a theme. Instead of loading Orchard Core and the full thing and Visual Studio, you just open VS Code with a theme. And to go further on Chris' comment, yes, there could be an extension where you manage Orchard, the backend, from VS Code. Why not with a tree view and content items, the themes, everything, and maybe different sections, like, okay, the theming section has code editors and IntelliSense and everything, and the content definition is using the VS Code forms based on JSON schema to edit the content itself. We build HTML, no, VS Code can let you edit JSON content, and then we could then push it on the server side. So VS Code could be the client of Orchard framework, of an Orchard instance. That could be if there was an extension for that. So instead of having a backend, we have a local application that doesn't require a web server locally running, and then we could edit content from a distance. It's kind of what we do with Holland, but with not a theme client. Was the opposite of a theme client? An app. Didn't you work on the shape tracing, on the replacement of the profiler shape tracing stuff, Chris? Didn't you build
Orchard 1.
for Orchard 1? Yeah. What was it?
Not exactly that. I built the performance profile and then I did donut cache, which sort of the shapes out.
Didn't you rewrote didn't you write the, what's the name, not the B profiler, but the glimpse version of in Orchard? Yeah, you wrote that. Okay.
Yeah.
There was a relationship, but I don't remember which one, between what I just said and what you said before.
There was a tab about
There was a tab, yeah. So this could be something like this, extensions that will connect to the eventing and to debug an Orchard site. So if you don't want to do it in the web because it's not adapted, like, the thing that injects into the website and is complicated because you have to deal with what you render and render something else, no, let's externalize it in an app and then let's connect to the server and show everything in this, not theme client, in this local app to show tracing, for instance, to show performance, to show,
I actually think a long time ago I might have created a prototype extension of Visual Studio Code where I pulled down the schema. Kind of rings a bell, but I can't.
So the hardest thing is to start to build an extension, to know how to build an extension, and then okay, you're free.
The hardest thing to language set up.
I would have a follow-up question. If we were to think of Visual Studio Code as kind of a channel to reach more people for Orchard Core, How should we go about that? So, should we try building an extension that makes Orchard core better? Should we try to make a language service? Or what would be the best avenue here?
So first of all, on the VS versus VS Code question, like, and which should you do, and saying you feel sorry for Visual Studio, which makes sense, right? But Microsoft's official position on this is that you should use whichever one you like and makes you happy, right? So we're trying to enable you. In my experience, Visual Studio is still the best .NET experience you can get, hands down, right? The C# Dev Kit is new, it's come a long way, but it's not the same. Visual Studio Code's really good for, like you said, making quick edits, especially if you're looking at tweaking visual things. It's really, really good for that because it's very non-committal. You just sort of jump in and jump out. I think for like increasing Orchard adoption, like getting more Orchard users kind of thing, using VS Code to do that?
No, I mean, VS Code is a user base, it's a community. Can we use VS Code to reach more people for Orchard Core?
I mean, you know, VS Code is, I don't know that this is true, but I'm hypothesizing that it might be the most adopted developer tool in history. It might be. If it's not, it's probably close, which means like just literally everyone that you can think of doing everything you can possibly think of is in Visual Studio Code in some form or fashion, right? Like even if they're not using it to write code, they might be using it to write Markdown or something else. So it's a huge community, but it's not homogeneous. And developers tend to be very homogeneous. I mean, look at us. We're at a conference for Orchard, which is a CMS and an application framework, as I understand it. Right? So we identify with each other because we share that in common. Or maybe like we might say I'm a .NET developer, and now that's my faction that I'm in. Or I'm a JavaScript developer, or I'm a Python developer. But these communities are really tight-knit, and the things that are popular in those communities are well known. So if you're doing front-end dev, you're using React, or you're using Vue or something like that. If you're doing Java, you're doing whatever the heck it is Java people do. I don't know. They probably have stuff that they like. So this is a roundabout way of saying that Visual Studio Code is a community, but it's a loose community. It is like the largest abstraction that you can put on a community. It's just like, you know, however 30 million or however many developers it is that are using Visual Studio Code. So it's difficult to say, like, can we leverage that to that community? I do think, though, that it's like how easy is the thing to use is always the question, right? How easy is it to get started? How easy is it to use? Is there an extension that makes it simple for me to do that? Is the AI good at it? Does Copilot know a lot about Orchard? I don't know if it does or not. It knows like a ton about Python. So you might just pick up Python because AIs are just really good at Python. So it's always about the tooling. Like how much better can the tooling be for people that makes them want to choose that over something else? And then of course, you know, if people build stuff for VS Code, we love that and we love to promote that. And yeah, we've got, you know, 500,000 subscribers on various channels. We would love to have somebody come on and show how to do Orchard Dev, talk about what Orchard is, and do it in Visual Studio Code. That'd be awesome. We'd love that.
Is there a way to train Copilot on Orchard-specific topics? So I can, you know, tell it, hey, I want to create me a specific class or something, and give it some information. Now, Copilot, when I open up the Orchard Core project, it's an expert on Orchard Core, where if I ask it Orchard Core specific, it will be able to do it. Is that possible?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways to do this. The ideal way is that someone builds an extension that allows you to connect to your tenant or whatever, and then that extension is extracting all the information and passing it to the model along with your requests. Like every time you mention at Orchard, you ask a question, in the background the extension does all that. But we don't have that today, so what could you do instead? What can you do instead? So there's a couple different strategies that you can use. One of them is that you can take a file, just create a new file in your project, and just start putting in information about your specific project, right? Just tell Copilot everything you can in that file. And then when you talk to Copilot, you can actually mention, if you use the hash sign, you can mention files, and you can ask a question and then mention the file, and we call that a rules file, and then it just goes along with your request. We're actually working on a rules file implementation right now to where you wouldn't have to mention the file every time. You would just have a file in there, and you would it would just be passed along with every request. So for instance, the way that you might do this if you're working with a database, I'm going to use the database because that's something I understand, is you might go to your database and extract the schema, right? You might run a command that just extracts the schema of the whole database, all primary keys, all relationships, and then you just dump that in your rules file, and then when you ask a question about your database, just tag the file. And then all of a sudden, GitHub Copilot is like an expert on your database because you've just told it all about your database. And you don't need to be structured in the way that you do it. You can dump just a bunch of like schema, SQL schema or whatever, and it's really good at that, right? It doesn't need you to explain things in detailed plain English. Just drop XML or, I don't know what sort of JSON or whatever, what have you, and that will work just fine. So those are sort of the options that we have today. I think one option I'd like to see in the future is that Orchard has docs, documentation, right? Okay, so maybe if I could ask a question and say, please use the Orchard docs to answer this question, and then Copilot would go out and look at the Orchard docs and do its retrieval augmented generation. I mean, there's a lot that can be done in this space. We're so early on.
It might be, just a thought, it might be useful where per project you can define additional resources, like you said documentation. So this project, utilize this website because that's where the documentation, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a way to submit samples so that way Copilot is aware of our project. So when I ask it, hey, create me a controller, it just knows how to go and create a controller. I mean, I'm pretty sure they can create a controller, but I mean, Orchard-specific controller.
Yeah.
So if there's a way I can train the model, I mean, this is a public model, but if there's a way I can include references in my model, so that way it can kind of do work based on my customization in a way. I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, so just one note on that. Sorry. Oh, excuse me. When we say fine-tuning, so there's like a couple different strats here for helping models like be experts on your data. So when we say fine-tuning, what we mean by that is you take a model. So models are trained on like the sum total knowledge of the internet, and that takes a long time, right? I think like it took like a month to train ChatGPT, and it also costs like $10 million to do that training, just in computation. Like I don't know if those stats are right, but it's what I'm trying to say, it's like a lot of time and a lot of money. And then after that, what they do is fine-tuning, and fine-tuning is where you actually pass the model information, the model responds, and then you correct the model, right? And then you train the data on these responses, and they do this with human beings. This is how ChatGPT was fine-tuned. People sat down, asked it questions, it responded, they said, nope, that's not right, they corrected it, and this is fine-tuning. And fine-tuning is something that you can do maybe a couple times a year for models. So for a lot of us, this is not feasible because we don't work with models like this. We don't have a model just sitting in a data center that we can fine-tune. We don't have $10 million to train it intensely once a year. And so I think then the other option is just where you're passing as much information as you can in the background to a model. So the model never gets trained or fine-tuned. It's just all about the prompt. It's all about the prompt. And that's why the bigger the prompt sizes we get with these models, the better, right? I think Google's got one that's got like a million kilobytes, or does that sound familiar? Gemini? It's like a giant prompt window. And you can imagine, you could pass like everything everyone's ever known about Orchard maybe into a prompt at some point to the model.
Thank you.
Crazy question.
Snake first.
You just have to talk louder.
Okay. So most of us in this room are developers, and probably,
Victoria?
Yeah. Many of us are developers, and like me, probably love the framework aspects of Orchard, but personally, like those have been my favorite projects. But I've also done a lot of projects that involved design and UI work and theming, and I'm just curious if anyone has recently had a good experience where they're working with a design firm that uses like Figma, Photoshop, Illustrator files, something like that, like the pipeline from design firm to development of website. Could someone talk about a case study using Orchard Core? Has that happened?
This is a softball. You gotta let me hit this one. It's a front end thing. I can say something. Hanging out with a bunch of super programmers, and I just wanted to say that just reiterating the love of the technology is that I feel like it's a crafty way of programming and developing websites. This is for people who love to make things perfect, and great design is married perfectly to highly specified content definition, exacting design. Good design comes from a response from the content. Our ability to model content in a very thoughtful, artful ways has been one of the reasons why we really enjoyed Orchard from the get-go. The content definition concepts, the ability to do things that are very much not out of the box. In our case, it's dealing with sound recordings, which are way more complex than you could possibly imagine. The fact that we are, in our case, having built something that does almost everything that Spotify does, and has done it for a very low budget, honestly. Doing powerful things for low cost is why I love .NET and Orchard, and this is totally not answering your question, but this is an opportunity to plug a design firm, Visual Dialogue, that we've been working with. It does come down to a really talented front-end programmer. When you can find them, they're worth their weight in gold. They teach you, they help you, they collaborate with you. They love when you can control your content in a way that is specific enough for it to be designed just right. And the sense that everything is possible and nothing is ever impossible in this kind of technology is why I love this work. So I'm not really adding much, but I just want to underscore that the design side is where the fun happens for me. The theming, and the matching of the custom module with correspondent theme is fantastic. And I'll demo it tomorrow, but we implemented an Ajax layer in front of our website so that we could support streaming. Watching our Orchard site run like super fast across all of this complex data in such a way that it can support streaming through an Ajax single page application. That was possible because the designer, because Luke could program it. We talked about how are we going to do this? How are we going to have audio streaming while we browse the site? So I'll save it for tomorrow, but hope that helps for somebody.
So I don't know if this will answer your question, but theming, when you have multiple people that trying to develop a theme, it's a kind of complicated thing because now you want to start with a Figma design, and then after that you want to somehow convert that to theme. And hopefully whoever's converting that to theme understands shapes, so they're able to actually, do, the final results. So what I actually did is I had a firm that did a design, and then I kind of had a structure for them on how to convert the design into XML in a way, and it's been a while, I haven't looked at that thing in a while, but there's some documentations about how should the Figma design be, and then how can that or should that be converted to plain HTML, and then knowing that you have a small files for the HTML, for example, the header, footer, right? So there's a project out there that I put together that allow you to kind of break your design into smaller files like header, footer, homepage, about us, all that. And then at the end of the day, you're able to take those small portions and convert that to theme. Well, someone needs to know how to convert that, but at the end of the day, you'll have something more that you can work with. You're taking the header and you're converting that to a theme or a template. So that I find that much more useful than, you know, trying to convert everything from scratch. Because if you're trying to take a design and jump to shapes, it's gonna a big jump. But if you have HTML, small portions of HTML where you can manipulate the design so you can break it down to pieces, then converting that into Orchard, it's fairly quick and easy. So I've done that with multiple themes, and that seemed to be pretty quick, even though I'm not a front-end guy. So even for me, it was fairly quick to follow. I mean, yeah, you can probably improve it. I don't know if that answers or help, but that project is actually, it's open source. I put it up there so you can look at it and see if it can help you.
Thanks.
So we have time for one more question, and Drew was already saying that she wants to talk.
This is really less of a question. I was going to comment on the previous topic. I haven't used AI much, but I was recently playing around with, I don't know the difference really between Copilot, GitHub Copilot and Microsoft Copilot, but I was playing around on Microsoft Copilot and was just curious if it knew about Orchard Core, and I said create an Orchard Core module that calls an API and displays some data in a liquid template, and I was really shocked that it actually came back with how to make a module and like create a liquid filter and a lot of stuff. I was kind of surprised that it knew about that without, all I did was mention that it's Orchard Core.
Yeah.
Can you do us a demo tomorrow?
The funny thing is I tried to recreate it later because I did this on my phone, and it actually gave me all the code and stuff. But later on my laptop, I typed in pretty much the same prompt, and it just gave me like a few steps of like do this and then do this and do this, and I was like, I don't know what I did different as to why one time it gave me lots of code and one time it just kind of gave me an overview of instructions, but I'm not sure.
Because you already asked it and just
It
doesn't want to work again. Just assumes that you know already.
Yeah, maybe.
We call that stochastic. Do you know what that word stochastic means?
Yeah.
Right, unpredictable. Right, so exactly what you just said. Where like you ask once, and you're like, wow, that's an amazing answer. You ask again, you're like, that's super unhelpful. and so to answer your question though, the difference between Copilot and Microsoft and GitHub Copilot is neither of these two things are AIs. They're not language models, rather. They are just like an interface. They're the tool that you use to talk to the model. And what they're really doing is like helping compose prompts for you. So like in your case, if you're asking Copilot on like the Bing Copilot?
It was copilot.microsoft.com.
Okay, so I think that's what I'm calling Bing. But like I have no idea what it's doing to help compose the prompt. But if you ask that same question inside of Visual Studio Code, I do know that it would say to the model, you are a friendly coding assistant, right? The user is using C# because it knows what projects you have open, right? It may even know that you're using Orchard. It may be able to determine that automatically. So in the background, in the prompt, GitHub Copilot at least, is passing information about you and your project along with your question. And it's also telling the model to do things like, believe it or not, it is doing this. It's telling the model to like slow down, take a deep breath, and move one step at a time. And I'm not kidding, this stuff matters because it causes the model to be more deliberate in its response. And then it also tells it to provide code examples, format your code as markdowns that can be parsed out. So that's sort of the difference there. I think you'll have better mileage in GitHub Copilot in terms of getting code for Orchard, but then again, maybe not. Who knows?
One comment, the best comment. Do you know how Microsoft does the prompts on the server side using templating? Which language? Liquid. Do you know what engine they use to render the Liquid? Beautiful. I won't say anything.
Okay, so thank you for all of the questions and thank you for the speakers.